Now, it's not very often I get all tingly in the crotchal region because of a big black box, but Microsoft's Xbox Series X is a little bit special. Sure, on the outside it is about as exciting as a soggy tea bag. In fact, the only way you could actually make it less interesting is probably by slapping a picture of Jacob Rees-Mogg on the side. But inside, of course, is where it really counts, as my old mum used to tell me when I was going bald in my early 20s. And inside of the Xbox Series X, you'll find a custom souped up AMD Zen 2 processor, you'll find a beefy 12 teraflops GPU, you'll find 16 gigs of GDDR6 RAM, all topped off with an insanely fast nVMe SSD which allows the latest next-gen titles to load in bugger all time. Now, I've spent a long and lovely month with that Xbox Series X, and I've also been comparing it side by side with Sony's PlayStation 5 for the past week and a half as well, so here is my in-depth review and how it stacks up against that massive albino tower. And for more on the latest greatest tech, please do poke subscribe and ding that notifications bell. Cheers! Now let's start with that design, and like Sony's PlayStation 5, the Xbox Series X is significantly different compared with the previous gen console, although Microsoft's box certainly appears less outlandish than that curvy colourless sci-fi slab, and it isn't quite as tall either. You do get some neat little design touches here and there, like that green accenting on those top mounted vents. Overall though, I reckon the Series X more closely resembles a stern PC rig than an actual gaming console. One thing's for sure though, it certainly doesn't stick out like a sore thumb and attract really confused glances, unlike the PS5. And connectivity certainly isn't an issue. You've only got a single USB port up front, all on its lonesome, but around back there's two more of the buggers if you need them, plus HDMI and Ethernet ports and an expansion port too, more on that later. Now, every time I boot up the Xbox Series X, it kind of gives me mixed feelings. On the one hand, this thing powers up crazy quick from cold, just taking 20 seconds in all, over a minute faster compared with the older One X. And this time saving is all down to that super nippy SSD, so no longer do you have to hit the power button, go off and make yourself a snack, read a chapter of your favourite book, God forbid have a conversation with your family. You can just boot up and get straight down to action. However, the actual Xbox UI hasn't really changed up at all for the Series X, so unlike the PS5, you don't get that immediate next-gen vibe when you get it going, beyond that speedier startup at least. I mean, the UI is perfectly fine and functional once you get used to it, and of course Xbox fans will already be used to it, so there's no learning curve whatsoever there, but it just lacks the sexy streamlined approach that Sony took with the PS5. But minor gripes aside, the Xbox Series X once again awes with its incredible power when you actually load up a game, because like the boot up, this is bowel-clenchingly quick. Titles that used to take literally 3 or 4 minutes to get going on the One X are now usually ready to play in just a minute or so at most. And meanwhile, the fresh quick resume feature means that you can dive back into any games that you recently played, resuming right where you left off, usually in just 10 to 15 seconds. And in fact, I was so impressed by the speed of the Xbox Series X and that quick resume feature that I did a full video just on that subject, so go check that out for all you need to know. And yeah, as far as backwards compatibility goes, I had no issues at all playing my old favourites here on the Series X. Titles that struggled somewhat on the older One X play like an absolute dream here, thanks to that power boost with the aforementioned pummeling of load times for added pleasure. Of course, to truly unlock this big boxy beast's full potential, you will need a telebox with HDMI 2.1 support. This opens up the ability to play games with Ultra HD visuals at up to a distinctly whopping 120 frames per second. So far, of course, there really aren't many games at all that can take advantage of that maximum 120 frames per second offering, but you can expect a lot more games to emerge with that kind of feature set in 2021. For now, however, you can definitely get all giddy playing the freshest titles like Assassin's Creed Valhalla at that gorgeous 4K resolution at a dependable 60 frames per second, which still looks very pleasingly smooth indeed, while Dirt 5 can hit that 120Hz refresh cap if you enable it in the settings. On my LG CX48 telebox, I haven't noticed any tearing or other frame rate issues at all, thanks to the variable refresh rate support. Every frame is packed with fine details on those enhanced for Series X titles, and gameplay is a beautifully fluid experience. And for those more quiet moments where you aren't desperately trying to fend off dozens of angry buggers with swords, you can chill and soak in those realistic lighting effects courtesy of the ray tracing support. And while I was gaming, I was impressed at how quiet the Xbox Series X was as well. Seriously, even with the audio dialed right down on the TV, I didn't notice any whirring or chugging or anything like that. Occasionally the fans get going, like when you first start up the Series X or if you're in the middle of a beefy download, but the rest of the time it is seriously no louder than a gerbil's fart. Now, much like that Xbox UI, the Series X's controller will be very familiar to any existing fans. Microsoft has made some subtle changes here and there which do improve the overall comfort levels, such as the textured finish to the D-pad and the trigger buttons so your fingers don't slip when they're all hot and sweaty. And those joins on the grips are now tapered too, so you can't actually feel them at all. And like the PS5's DualSense controller, you now have a share button on there too for quickly sharing screen grabs and videos of your in-game accomplishments. Perfect for tormenting your great mate Kevin with a close-up angle of you exploding his skull with a pulse rifle. And again, like the old controller, it's a pair of AA batteries that powers the Xbox Series X's controller. Personally, I'd just rather have a built-in rechargeable battery, but you can get a rechargeable battery pack which just slots in there, and that replaces those AA's, so you can just charge it via the Type-C instead. And I gotta say, personally, I was more impressed by the PS5's DualSense controller with those tensile triggers, and of course the extreme rumble from the haptics as well, but given purists will probably prefer the Xbox Series X controller. And the main thing after all is that it is very comfortable to use even for hours at a time. And yes, your old Xbox One controller will still work a treat here on the Series X as expected. Now you can fit a fair few Xbox titles onto the Series X's 1TB SSD, of which around 800 gigs is free for you to play around with. Although plenty of titles like Dirt 5 and Gears 5 take up anything from 50 to 100 gigs, while updates often blaze past the 5 to 10 gig mark. And if you go a bit mental with the beefy Game Pass catalogue, you'll probably piss through your spare space in no time at all. All the same, that's loads more usable storage space than the PS5 offers, and you can quickly expand the Xbox Series X's storage by slipping a custom card into that expansion port around back, which will boost it by a further 1TB. And apparently that custom card offers the exact same super nippy performance as that nVMe SSD as well, although I haven't had a chance to actually personally test that myself, but you should be able to just load it full of your Series X enhanced games and they should just load up straight away, no worries. Otherwise, you can of course just stick any compatible external SSD into the back of the Xbox Series X using one of those spare USB ports, and that can be used to play older Xbox titles or simply to copy your games off onto the internal drive. As for the actual games themselves, well, you may well find yourself raiding that Game Pass library or replaying those last gen classics with the improved performance and loading times for a wee while longer. You'll find some decent cross-gen and cross-platform titles launching around now, including the excellent Assassin's Creed Valhalla, but there's very little in the way of enticing exclusives for the Series X just yet. Give it a bit of time, of course, and the Series X will have a great range of titles, some of which you'll only be able to grab for that big black box. But don't worry too much if you don't have the funds available pre-Christmas, because you can definitely hold off until 2021 before grabbing your box, so to speak. As for media shenanigans, you've got full Dolby Vision support here, as long as your telly can actually handle it, so DV content on Netflix or from your Blu-rays looks really gorgeous. And if you've got a Dolby Atmos setup too, you'll get proper immersive sound as long as you grab that app from the Xbox store. All of the usual streaming services are supported through the Xbox Series X's entertainment menu, including Disney+, Netflix, Prime Video, Now TV, yada yada, as well as music streamers like Spotify and Deezer. And you can also rent or buy a respectable selection of new flicks as well. And speaking of which, did you know that they just made another Tremors movie? And yes, of course, Michael Gross is back for yet another big helping. 2020, you crazy bastard. Just when I thought you had no more surprises in store, yeah. But anyway, that's what I think of the Xbox Series X after playing with it for a full month. I'm definitely really enjoying it indeed. The game lineup isn't quite there just yet, but give it a bit of time, you'll get your Halos and all that good stuff on the go. And it's kind of a shame they didn't jazz up the UI a bit to make it feel next gen like the PS5. But you know what? It's still an absolute powerhouse, and I'm absolutely loving going through all those Game Pass titles on there and all of those old classics as well, which just play it perfectly. So that's what I think. But if you've got the Xbox Series X, definitely be great to hear your own personal thoughts and experiences down in the comments below. Please do subscribe, ding that notifications bell, and have yourselves a lovely rest of the week. Cheers everyone, love you.